Before we start, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. She only realized she was shaking when the water glass started tapping gently against her teeth. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame either. It was that deep, heavy exhaustion that comes from having explained your own existence too many times. "You can start," one of them said without looking up. She took a deep breath. The kind that doesn't fill your chest, just prevents collapse. "I didn't do this." The silence lasted less than a second. It was enough. The first officer smiled sideways. The second glanced at his colleague. It wasn't a laugh. It was worse. A low, knowing chuckle, like an inside joke. "Everyone says that," one of them commented. She didn't respond. She'd learned early that some words, when spoken, only work against you. "Look," the other leaned back in his chair. "If you cooperate, everything gets easier." "Easier for who?" she asked, her voice too steady for someone in that position. They looked at each other again and laughed. The sound echoed in the small interrogation room. Not loud, not cruel exactly, just casually dismissive. The kind of laughter that says, "We've heard it all before," and "You're not special," and "This is how this goes," all at once. She looked down at the glass in her hands. The water was still now that she'd set it on the table. She studied the fluorescent lights reflected in its surface, distorted and fragmented. "We have witnesses," the first officer said, pulling a thin folder from under his arm. "3 people who saw you at the scene." "What scene?" she asked quietly. "The apartment." "His apartment." "It was our apartment," she corrected. "For 7 years." The second officer shrugged. "Not according to the lease." She felt something tighten in her chest. Of course. The lease had always been in his name. He'd insisted. Something about his credit being better, about making things simpler. She'd been so young then, so willing to believe that paperwork didn't matter when you loved someone. "I was picking up my things," she said. "Things I'd left there. My clothes, my books." "At midnight?" The first officer raised an eyebrow. "He changed the locks. I had to wait until he was out." "Breaking and entering." "It's not breaking and entering when it's your own belongings. But it's not your residence," the second officer said, tapping the folder. "So technically," the door opened. Not violently, not even quickly, just with a deliberate, measured pressure that made both officers straighten in their seats. The chief walked in like someone who'd seen this scene before and was tired of it. He set a thick folder on the table. Not thrown, not slammed, just placed with a kind of precision that demanded attention. He looked at the water glass, at the chairs positioned at aggressive angles, at the barely concealed smirk still lingering on the wrong faces. "What's happening here?" "Just a routine questioning," the first officer said, too quickly. The chief pulled out a chair and sat down, directly across from her. "What's your name?" she told him. "Have you been arrested before?" "No?" "Have you ever signed something without reading it?" She hesitated. The question felt loaded, like it was about more than paperwork. "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something. "Did they laugh at you?" The room went still. She didn't answer, but the trembling in her hands stopped. "Out," the chief said without raising his voice. The 2 officers froze. "Now?" "Sir, we were just—" "I'm aware of what you were doing. Leave." The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. The chief opened his folder. Not hers, she realized. A different one, much thicker. "I'm not going to promise you anything," he said. "But I will listen." That's when something she didn't know she'd been holding began to give way. She told him everything. Not like someone building a defense, like someone dismantling a life. She talked about her respectable ex-husband, about the shoves that never left visible marks, about threats spoken softly, always with a smile, about the day she decided to leave, and about the police report that somehow turned against her. "He has friends," she said. "He's always had friends." The chief was flipping through his folder, not hers. "The other one?" "Do you know why I came into this room today?" he asked. She shook her head. "Because this isn't the first name that's come up connected to him." She slowly raised her face. "What?" "You're not being accused. You're being used." The air grew heavy. "Then why am I here?" The chief closed the folder. Because you were the only one who refused to stay silent. She stared at him, trying to process what that meant. There were others? 3 that I know of. 2 filed reports and then dropped them within 48 hours. 1 never even made it to a statement. She was talked out of it in the parking lot. He leaned forward slightly. Your ex-husband works in the prosecutor's office. Did you know that? He's a paralegal, she said. Not a prosecutor. So a paralegal with 20 years of connections, who plays golf with half the department, who shows up to every retirement party. The chief's voice was flat, factual. The kind of person people want to believe in because it's easier than the alternative. She felt her throat tighten. So nothing happens to him. I didn't say that. He pulled out another document, this one with several sticky notes marking specific pages. You filed 3 separate domestic disturbance reports over 2 years. Each time, the responding officers noted no visible injuries and conflicting accounts. Each time, the case was listed as unfounded. He looked up. Do you know who responded to all 3 calls? Oui. The recognition hit her like cold water. The 2 officers who were just in here, Officer Henricks and Officer Soto, both of whom regularly have coffee with your ex-husband, both of whom were at his birthday party last month. The chief's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. This isn't about whether you broke into an apartment. This is about a pattern, and you're the first thread that didn't break when they pulled it. She sat back, the weight of it settling over her. What happens now? Now you go home, no charges, not today, not tomorrow. And him. The chief stood collecting his folders. That's not your concern anymore. Your concern is making sure you have copies of everything. Every text, every email, every receipt that proves what belonged to you. Your concern is finding somewhere safe to stay until this resolves. I don't have anywhere. Yes, you do. He pulled a card from his pocket and set it on the table. Women's Resource Center. Ask for Patricia. Tell her I sent you. She picked up the card with numb fingers. Why are you helping me? He paused at the door. Because 23 years ago, my sister was in a room just like this one, and nobody listened. Hours later, she walked out. Not in handcuffs, not absolved, but seen. The fluorescent lights in the station hallway seemed different somehow. Less harsh, more like simple illumination. She passed through the lobby where Officer Henricks was filling out paperwork. He glanced up and their eyes met for half a second before he looked away. She kept walking. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. She stood on the steps for a moment, letting it fill her lungs. A city bus rumbled past. Someone laughed at a distant corner. The world was continuing, indifferent to the earthquake that had just rearranged her understanding of the past 2 years. She called the number on the card. Patricia speaking. The chief told me to call. I need somewhere to stay. How soon can you get here? I can take a bus, maybe 30 minutes. I'll wait up. Bring whatever you have with you. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. The resource center was a converted house on a quiet street, the kind of place you'd drive past without noticing. Patricia met her at the door, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had clearly seen versions of this story before. You're safe here, Patricia said, and somehow, it didn't sound like a platitude. The room was small but clean. A twin bed, a desk, a lamp, a window that actually locked from the inside. She checked. She sat on the bed and pulled out her phone. 47 text messages, most from numbers she didn't recognize. She deleted them without reading. One message was from her sister. Are you okay? I heard something happened. She typed back, I will be. Vida. The first week was paperwork. Restraining order applications, affidavits, witness statements that Patricia helped her organize into something coherent. The resource center had a lawyer who volunteered 3 days a week, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Chen, who listened to the whole story without interrupting once. The good news, Miss Chen said, is that you documented everything. Every call, every report, even the ones they dismissed. That creates a timeline. And the bad news? The bad news is that timelines don't always matter when the people reading them don't want to see the pattern. But something was shifting. 2 days after she'd left the station, another woman came forward, then another. Stories that echoed hers. The soft-spoken threats, the strategic isolation, The reports that went nowhere. The chief's investigation widened. Not publicly, not with press releases, but with the quiet, methodical work of someone who knew how to build a case that couldn't be dismissed. Officer Henricks and Officer Soto were placed on administrative leave. An internal review was opened. The prosecutor's office suddenly became very interested in every case her ex-husband had touched in the past 5 years. She watched it unfold from the resource center, feeling strangely detached. This wasn't victory. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This was just visibility. The difference between being dismissed and being documented. "How are you feeling about all this?" Patricia asked one evening over tea. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I'd feel vindicated, but mostly I'm just tired." "That's normal. You've been running on adrenaline for months, maybe years. What happens when this is over?" Patricia smiled slightly. "It's never really over, but it becomes different, manageable. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I don't have a job. I don't have an apartment." "You have time," Patricia interrupted gently. "That's what you have now. Time to figure out what you actually want, instead of what you're running from." 3 months later, the case concluded. Not with a dramatic trial, not with handcuffs or headlines. Her ex-husband resigned from the prosecutor's office to pursue other opportunities. Officers Henricks and Soto were reassigned to desk duty pending further review. The department implemented new protocols for domestic disturbance calls, mandatory body cameras, mandatory supervisor review, mandatory follow-up within 72 hours. It felt insufficient and enormous all at once. She'd found work at a nonprofit that helped people navigate legal services. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it felt right somehow, using the crash course she'd received in bureaucracy to help others avoid the same pitfalls. 6 months after that, she received a call from the chief. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "I'm listening." "The department is developing a new training program, community liaison officers, focused specifically on domestic cases. We need someone who understands both sides, the procedures and the people. You want me to train police officers? I want you to help us do better." She was quiet for a long moment. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." 1.5 years after the night in the interrogation room, she sat across a conference table from 15 recruits. They looked young, eager, some nervous, some overconfident. "This is Domestic Response 101, she began. "And the first thing you need to understand is that everything you think you know is probably incomplete." She walked them through scenarios, real cases, anonymized but intact. She showed them how easy it was to miss the pattern when you only saw the moment, how documentation mattered, how the absence of visible injury didn't mean the absence of harm. Midway through the session, a young recruit, couldn't have been more than 23, raised his hand. "What if the person is lying? I mean, statistically, some people do make false reports." The room went quiet. She looked at him for a long moment. Not angry, not defensive, just present. "You're right," she said. "Some people do lie. And that's why we investigate. That's why we document. That's why we don't make determinations in the first 30 seconds of an encounter." She paused. "But here's what I want you to remember. The cost of believing a liar is inconvenience. The cost of dismissing someone telling the truth can be their life." Another recruit shifted uncomfortably. "That seems like a lot of pressure." "It is," she agreed. "That's the job." Near the end of the session, a different recruit, a woman this time, asked quietly, "How do we know when to push and when to back off?" "You listen," she said simply. "Not to what you expect to hear, to what's actually being said." As the recruits filed out, several stopped to thank her. One lingered. "Can I ask you something personal?" She nodded. "How did you get through it?" "The whole thing?" She considered the question. "I didn't get through it alone, and I didn't get through it by being strong all the time. I got through it by accepting help when it was offered, and by refusing to let other people's dismissal define my reality." The recruit nodded slowly. "Thank you." That evening, she drove past the old police station. The building looked the same. The steps where she'd stood that night, breathing in the cool air, trying to orient herself. She didn't stop, just kept driving. Her apartment was small, but hers. Lease in her name, locks she'd chosen, furniture she'd picked out piece by piece. There was a bookshelf by the window filled with everything she'd thought she'd lost. She made tea and sat on the couch, letting the silence settle around her. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just silence. The ordinary, unremarkable quiet of a Wednesday evening. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. How did the training go? Good, hard, important. That's the trifecta. Proud of you. She smiled and set the phone down. Outside her window, the city continued its endless motion. Cars and voices and lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict. She thought about the recruits, about the ones who would remember this training and the ones who wouldn't, about the difference one person paying attention could make, about the sound of laughter in an interrogation room, and how quickly it could die when someone who knew that sound walked in. She thought about her younger self, trembling with a water glass, believing she had to explain her existence to people who'd already decided not to listen. And she thought about who she'd become, someone who'd learned that the most powerful response to dismissal wasn't rage or even resilience. It was refusal. Refusal to be erased. Refusal to accept that documentation didn't matter. Refusal to let the system's failures become her failures. The tea grew cold in her hands, but she kept holding it, watching the steam dissipate into nothing. Tomorrow, she'd go back. More recruits, more scenarios, more opportunities to plant seeds that might take root in a traffic stop or a domestic call or a late-night interrogation. Some would listen, some wouldn't. But she would keep showing up, because she knew something now that she hadn't known in that interrogation room. Her voice had always mattered. Some people just hadn't been willing to hear it. Now she was teaching them how. And when the next nervous recruit laughed, uncomfortable, uncertain, looking for social cues in a difficult moment, she would be there, ready to look them in the eye, ready to let that laughter die. Not with anger, not with judgment, with presence, with the quiet, unmistakable authority of someone who'd sat on both sides of that table and knew exactly what was at stake. The silence had spoken once. Now it had a voice. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe for more.